Hello, and welcome to the fifth episode of the fifth season of Law and Candor, the podcast wholly devoted to pursuing the legal technology revolution. I'm Rob, and I'm here with my co-host Bill Mariano. Thanks again for tuning in. And before we get into the substance of our discussion today, of course, we'll pause for
Sightings of Radical Brilliance,
where we talk about interesting innovations or other cool technical stuff that's happening in the legal industry. Bill, what have we got today?
So we got an article on law.com by Ghulam Zaid. Hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Interesting article published last week about overcoming the next big hurdle for remote law firms, efficiency. And this is more practical, right? It looks at the practicality of the at-home work environment for law firms and some of the issues that they've had to deal with. Because, look, I mean, us here at Lighthouse, we went from a 60-40, 70-30 work office to home to a 90-10 work from home recently with COVID. And you know, there are issues presented for it by such a thing, especially law firms who are used to going into the office.
Yeah, I think the model, at least, when I was at a law firm, you definitely leaned heavy on your technical support people, but it was like, come up to my office and fix this computer, because it's not working, or help me, figure out how to run this search. A little bit different when you're at home and, hopefully you're using tools, that are cloud-based so that at least you're able to operate with the whole tool set. One thing I thought was kind of interesting is, he mentions this article, does it kind of possibly even raise ethical issues? I mean, under the ABA model rules, there of course are rules around, technical competence and using the best technology for your clients. If you didn't have access to those because you were at home, I guess I can see where he's going with that one. Yeah,
and I think, this started originally, I think, when they first pivoted and they started sending people home, let's say up in the Northeast area, started sending people home back in March and April. I think at first they were worried about cyber security, right? They were worried about the, not having the same security at home as you would have in the office for people not logging into the VPN, worrying about phishing scams, things like that. They overcome that, and now it becomes, what about, updating the technology? And to your point, they started working with the fact that it's so much easier now with cloud-based systems to make sure everybody's on the same updated technology. But, then you have the practical issue of, communicating and collaborating with your colleagues. And that's where we've seen this big uptick in Microsoft Teams, for instance. But Microsoft Teams has exploded due to COVID. I mean, it's one area that has really done very well in the COVID environment. But not everybody was as familiar with Microsoft Teams. I mean, we consult with companies all the time on Microsoft Teams, and law firms are probably the least proficient there because they don't rely on it nearly as much because they're always in office.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I think a shout out to the unsung heroes in law firms. The poor people that are kind of running remote technical support over the last 6 months. Can't imagine how busy those people have been. I know they're always sort of relied on, and I'm sure it's even more so now. So good job keeping everybody going.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that we should probably shout out our own IT people here because I've been driving them nuts over those last few months. But it's really interesting. The idea, I guess, when you're at a law firm, you don't want your clients to see any difference in your communication, your collaboration, your efficiency, certainly your billing, because you're doing things remotely in ways that you've never done them before. And it looks like they're adapting. And this article takes an interesting look at how that's sort of evolved and how the new, how once you've eliminated the security problem, then you move on to a hardware software issue or cloud issue, and then you start working on the more practical things about communicating and collaborating. So interesting.
Definitely. All right. Well, we're excited to showcase our next guest speaker, talking about something that I think is just relevant to a lot of our listeners. How do you use advanced analytics to facilitate, a large review? So please stay tuned and take a listen.
Okay, so our guest today is Adam Strayer of Paul Weiss. Adam, if you can just give us a little bit of background on yourself and our audience.
Sure. Thanks for having me. So my name's Adam Strayer. I'm the eDiscovery Analytics and Data Science Manager at Paul Weiss, Rifkind, Wharton, and Garrison, if you want to be formal.
I felt like those guys at the end of that always got the bad end, right? They always got the
also Rens.
Yeah.
I think like you guys, I started my career similar to you. I finished law school and started to practice. I think you guys went into private practice. I went straight to the Federal Trade Commission, actually, and spent several years working on merger investigations and reviews. issuing second requests, merger prosecutions. Particularly, I was in the Mergers 2 division, which focused at the time on chemicals, plastics, some consumer goods, but also computer hardware. After that, I actually went into private practice and did antitrust defense work for a while in New York at a small boutique antitrust firm, and then moved into e-discovery because obviously I'd been working on second requests for the bulk of my career. It was an easy transition, or at least a natural transition. And then I spent about the last decade working in e-discovery consulting, mostly focused on analytics and predictive coding, providing advice on second requests, internal investigations, etc. And now for the last 2.5 years, I've been at Paul Weiss running what we call eDart. It's our internal e-discovery analytics team. Naturally, we focus on all types of analytics, predictive coding, clustering, machine learning, etc. And we also have a small data science team that works on data wrangling, data cleanup, looking for trends in data. So,
Adam, you know how much we love analytics. We talk about it all the time on the podcast. Just curious to get your opinion on why are we seeing sort of greater use of advanced analytics on larger matters, especially second requests? Could you maybe just shed a little bit of light on that?
It's funny. I'm sure you guys saw the same thing. It started off around 2011, 2012, as if that was the year of TAR. It was the legal tech of TAR, whichever year it was, and it seemed like everything was going to go gangbusters. And then we saw more and more, and it increased a little bit. But then, from my perspective, it kind of plateaued. Like even in 2018, 2017, we were still introducing clients to these tools who just hadn't either used them or had shied away from them. And so there was a big learning curve there for a lot of clients that I think only in the last year or two has really seemed to kind of plateau, where now everyone's aware of these. Most people are really comfortable using them in some way, shape, or form. The efficiencies are very clear to most people in the industry, even if they still are a little wary of the black box and don't totally trust the statistics. I think it's really come around. And I'm seeing partners who in the past may not have wanted to deal with these kind of tools now really want us to integrate them into their cases.
Yeah, when you say, the key is they still don't want to deal with them. They want you to deal with them for them, right?
Yeah. Exactly.
That's where someone like you delivers the value, right, for your firm and your firm's clients. So let's talk a little bit about some of the tools and strategies that you've leveraged in, either a recent matter or that you routinely leverage on behalf of your clients to make sure that, to leverage technology to mitigate the cost traditionally associated with reviewing needless documents or things like that.
Right. I mean, I think I've heard your other guests say it's definitely a toolkit, and there's no one size fits all for every case, and you really come to it with a suite of tools and a kind of bespoke approach for every one. That said, there are set tools, so we do take, we do look to use the basics like email threading and near duplicate identification and even keyword expansion on almost all of our matters. But our approach is really to look beyond just those and to use things like concept clustering and concept searching to really build out either keyword lists or to identify key documents really early on. And then ideally to use some form of predictive coding, be that TAR 1.0 or CAML, CMML, on almost all matters, particularly educating clients and lawyers by using these tools to prioritize documents. And they've seen really early on in these projects, like, oh, wow, we're seeing vast amounts of responsive documents right away. So our approach really is to take all these tools in our box and kind of really approach every case like a special baby and make use of these.
Adam, I think another thing, it's having the technology is one thing, but what are some of the more effective and efficient workflows that you'd recommend? Because I think we know that workflows matter just as much as technology does.
Yeah, and you're building that workflow on the fly often, and clients and lawyers really want you to get in the documents right away. Don't, just start reviewing on day one, throw bodies at it. And we've really found that taking a little bit of time on the front end to think through what the workflow is going to be, to look through your document universe, to find responsive documents, to see, just kind of get a sense of what's there, is really helpful in the first couple of days. One thing is, I think we're fortunate by being an internal shop at a firm, is that we're able to look at historical data within the firm, track that, go to attorneys and say, here's the success rate we've had on this one. We can do a lot of lookbacks and retrospectives, particularly in the adoption or use of CAML internally. We've been able to say, look at this second request. It was huge. We used CAML on it. And you can see that over the 7-8 week review, we saw 80% of all responsive documents in the first 3 weeks. And I can take that data and take it down the hall to another partner and say, here's what we should think about using on this case, or we might want to consider. So that's definitely an advantage that vendors don't necessarily have, is that kind of internal credibility.
Yeah, but then again, we don't have to walk down the hall in law firms. So
that's safer. That's much safer.
Yeah, exactly. But let's talk about something we talk about a lot here, which is leveraging each individual person's expertise and perspective, right? And so we, like, for instance, our data scientists that we work with aren't necessarily lawyers, right? They don't necessarily have that background in law. They see zeros and ones. You do a little bit of both. Then you have partners that don't know anything about technology, and then you have in-house counsel that know a lot about their own internal, let's say, the strategy behind the deal. Let's taking the second request as an example, and the litigator understanding how to litigate that with the FTC or the DOJ. So let's talk about combining or leveraging the different expertise, talents, and perspectives of each of the team members that might be involved when you're going about leveraging technology. Do you interview these different people? Do you talk to different people to get some context? And how do you do that and combine that with the technology you have in your toolkit?
So there are kind of two pieces there. The first one was kind of what I built my career on, I think, was that running interference between the project management support and the analytics support and the lawyers, because I had that lawyer experience where I understood what went into a second request, what was required by a second request, or just a large document review, and I could explain that to lawyers, I think, pretty well. I'm really fortunate now to have a really very experienced team who's really good at explaining these tools and working closely with lawyers and explaining this. But to the other part of your question, as to how do you leverage all these various individuals with various different expertise? It's hugely beneficial to have the client involved, to have someone from the client's IT to be engaged, to explain what it is we're looking at, kind of identify any holes, and to work closely with us there. And then certainly to have, if we have the opportunity, to have someone who substantively knows these documents on the front end, be that a really, well-versed associate who's been deep in these documents. On many matters, not just on second requests, we often sit down in the room with associates or partners, and we'll sit there and go through clusters with them. That benefits us as we move forward, because then we kind of, through osmosis, pick up some of that understanding of the case. But also, I think it helps them understand these tools, how they work, and I think it helps us identify, for example, better seed documents for a predictive coding project. So really having everyone engaged from start to finish and understanding at least some part of all segments in this is really helpful.
Yeah, that's great. You're sort of like you end up having to correct. It's a little bit like herding cats, but if you do it correctly, it can be rewarding at the end. So. And this has been fantastic. I appreciate it. This is a topic we keep coming back to more and more, and I think that the feedback we get from the audience is that anytime we can touch on analytics, especially in specific use cases, and here we talked about second request quite a bit, it's really valuable. People like talking about it because, analytics can be an amorphous word. So how are we actually putting it to use in practice? And I think our clients get a lot out of it. So I can't thank you enough. I'm going to take a stab at a recap here, and you said a lot of really interesting things, so I want to make sure I had it all. We talked about taking the time at the front end will save you some time on the back end, right? Whether that's through sampling or otherwise prioritizing data. Like you mentioned, the one thing I thought was really interesting is that you've had some success in prioritizing and front-loading responsive documents. I think you said something about 80% of the documents on a matter that you were able to get up front were responsive, which I think is a phenomenal success story, because it really does keep the attorney's eyes on documents that they need to review and keeps them less off of. If you have that kind of track record, you can start to leverage that going forward. Also, don't rely on any one tool, but there's no magic button, so to speak. Use the entire toolkit at your disposal and leverage everything that you have to its fullest capability. Each case, I think you said, was a special baby. I put down Snowflake. I think, the same thing. And leveraging the experience and the perspectives of each of the team members oftentimes will help you to get a really good sense of the project as you're deciding which tools in your toolkit you're going to use. Anything you'd like to add to that? But I think I got most of that genius that you were spewing over the last 10 minutes. But if I missed anything, let me know.
Hardly genius, but thank you. The one thing I'd add we didn't touch on really is the use of sampling and how important that can be and how useful it can be to really understand your data and get an insight into what's there. We sample really early, just taking small random samples to kind of get a sense of the richness, to look for what outliers might be there, to kind of find holes in the data. So that's the one part I would add.
Yeah, I think that's great, and I think I think that's a part of any good, especially with TAR and Camel. I think that's a part of every good process, especially if you have experienced some success in the past, which obviously you have. Adam, I can't thank you enough. We can't thank you enough for joining today. I really appreciate this. This is a super hot topic. I doubt this will be the last time we speak on it. It's really fantastic to have you. Thanks so much for sharing your thoughts on it and for bringing your expertise to Law and Candor. I have to tell you, get ready for like weird things to start happening to you now, especially if you wear the Law and Candor t-shirt outside. People will start chasing you down the street. People will be asking for autographs. You might catch a request for a black and white autograph picture of yourself to be hung in local diners in New Jersey. There's all kinds of random things that are going to happen to you now, and you're just going to say, who do I have to blame for this? And you could just blame it on Bill and Rob.
Fortunately, I'm hiding during quarantine in northern Michigan where there is like no people, so I'm totally safe.
Well, that's good. Good for you. Listen, take care, stay safe. Thank you so much for joining us. This was really great. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
This is Rob with a call out to our dedicated fan base. If you support world peace, if you support everything good, please support the Law and Candor podcast. Like us, give us a great review, subscribe, do whatever you can do to help, and we, of course, will be eternally grateful. Thank you.